Now that we've covered the overall user interface, let's dig into one of the core components of Hearts of Iron 4, using your military. It is a war game after all. So when you first start the game, you'll want to collect your various divisions into armies. You can select your divisions by clicking a single unit on the map, holding shift and clicking multiple units, or dragging a box around those units. You can also use the army list and hold shift to select multiple units here, and when you let go of shift, it will select all of them as one selection. Once you have at least one division selected, you can right-click at the bottom of the screen to either add those divisions to a new army by clicking the plus box, or if there's an existing army, you can add to that army by right-clicking it. When you have at least one division in an army, you can click that army, and then in the upper left corner of the screen, click the silhouette labeled Click to Assign, and assign a general. Generals apply bonuses to all of the divisions under their command, and can gain experience and traits as they engage in combat. Now with at least two armies selected, we'll hold shift and click both of these for example, you can click the plus to the left of them to create an army group. Like armies, these can be led by an individual character, in this case called a field marshal. Field marshals work like generals, applying a portion of their bonus to every division under them. Sometimes generals and field marshals will have an icon glowing on their portrait. This means you can give them either some kind of enhancement or a new trait or an officer corps role. Selecting a preferred tactic is free if that's available for you, but picking a trait or assigning them an officer corps role requires you to have some kind of command power. From the army or army group window, you can also rename your armies, choose an insignia, change the colors, and so on. You can even change division templates. So for example, if I wanted to select all of my cavalry and click my change division template icon to turn them into, that will work, but they'll have to restart their organization once they get all of the required equipment. In this case, I have the manpower, but I don't have enough infantry, support equipment, and towed artillery to support this division change. With a large enough army, you can also create new theaters to group your sets of army groups by region on the world map, and you can even control supplies and reinforcements by theater. That's a little outside the scope of this series, but it is important to know that that's what this option means, is this is collections of army groups. To recruit new divisions, you can click the Recruit and Deploy icon, and then click Train on any template that you want to start training. So if I want to train more infantry, I can click that. From here, I can click the words No Location Set, and then click any territory that I control in green, and that's where these new divisions will appear when they are ready to be used on the battlefield. I can add more units to produce more of these at the same time, and now I'll be training 3 infantry units in parallel. And this number up here lets me set how many I want to produce. I can keep producing this as long as I have the manpower and equipment, or I can produce a specific amount. Say I want to produce 6 here, and it will try to produce those in 2 sets of 3 in this case. As we discussed previously, you can modify your division templates to better suit your needs. So here you can click Edit, modify your templates, and hit Save. You can also change the icon to something that's more exciting for you, give them a new name or even a new type of division. And here you can have this unit be Reserves. This is the equipment's lowest priority. This is the average priority, and this is Elite, which means these guys get their equipment before anyone else once deployed and at the highest priority. So you may want to have, for example, your Special Forces have their equipment first, and your regular infantry be on default. At the top of the Recruit and Deploy screen, there are some selections that can change how the produced equipment gets to the front lines or to currently training divisions. Depending on whether you choose red for low priority, yellow for medium priority, or green for high priority, that changes how the game chooses to allocate equipment. Any division templates in the training queue have their own priority buttons to determine if equipment is going to their training, as we just saw. Reinforcement sends equipment to new troops being sent back into an existing division to replenish losses. Upgrade sends better equipment you're producing to divisions in the field that will replace obsolete equipment. Supply trucks prioritizes trucks going to supply hubs as opposed to divisions. And Garrison sends equipment to maintain control of occupying divisions in occupied territory. So this is a very helpful option if you're running out into that message about not enough manpower or equipment to fulfill our garrisons. You can prioritize garrison equipment, for example. And Operations is the equipment priority for any equipment that needs to go into the preparation and execution of spy missions. Now there's several different ways that you can organize your army groups. Some things to keep in mind are that the maximum number of divisions in a single army is 24 for those with offensive orders, and 72 with defensive orders. Some technologies and doctrines can modify that, and you can exceed these limits, but your commander's bonuses will be reduced in direct proportion to how much you exceed the cap. If you're a small country with less than 24 divisions at the beginning of the game and few generals to choose from, perfectly fine to simply lump all of your divisions into a single army and assign a general. As you grow, or if you start out as a bigger country, you can maximize your bonuses by creating armies by division type and assigning generals with bonuses for those types. For example, infantry in its own army with a general that gives infantry-specific bonuses. And here I can double-click one of these unit types in the list to select all of the other divisions that match that and create a new division with all infantry troops. And I can do the same thing here and add to that. We could also do the same thing with our armored divisions here and create an armored division and so on. And for each of these, you can pick a general to maximize infantry bonuses, for example. Here we have an infantry officer. Infantry leader experience factor, 100%. For army with tanks, we can pick somebody that has one of the tank bonuses, for example, armor officer. Panzer leader experience factor, 100%. So pay attention to your options for generals, and you can line them up to maximize their bonuses for the troops under their command. Whenever you give orders to generals or field marshals, they're automatically going to send divisions to fulfill your orders based on your policies and their skill level. You can tell your divisions what to do using the Battle Plans menu that shows up over your armies at the bottom of the screen. The top 3 buttons modify your planning speed, which we'll come back to. The rest are used for various orders. So in the Policies section, exercising your army costs equipment and manpower and steadily gives those armies experience. This is a great way to generate army XP for modifying division templates or creating new tank designs without being at war. Be warned, however, that this will give the participating armies a significant organization penalty, so you'll want to stop before you go to war and give your armies time to get ready. You can also choose to execute your battle plans carefully, balanced, or aggressively, which determines how risky you want your generals to be. Careful generals will only push your front line when they have significant advantage to minimize casualties, but as a result it might take them much longer to accomplish their objectives. On the opposite end of the spectrum, aggressive generals push through losses towards their objective, but might leave parts of your front line exposed. One thing that destroys armies is being encircled and cut off from supply, so be very careful and only use this if you're closely watching your division's movement or have a careful general picking up the slack. Cohesion determines how far armies will move along a battle line. If your front line's relatively small, you really won't notice any difference from these settings, but if you're invading Russia, this could have your infantry marching hundreds of miles to reinforce a small part of your orders. We'll talk about naval invasions and paratrooper orders in just a little bit. The frontline order is the first step in assigning divisions to attack an enemy. With an army or army group selected, you can click the frontline order, and then click the border of an enemy to assign a front line. Your generals will automatically order divisions to spread out along that line. If for some reason you don't want to use a front line across the entire border, you can use right-click and drag to designate a front line of any arbitrary width. With that front line order in place, you can then use offensive line to tell those divisions where to go. Essentially, the front line is your starting line, and the offensive line is your finish line. And the generals will try to move the front line until it is now the offensive line, and then hold that waiting for new orders. Spearhead works just like the offensive line, with one key exception. Divisions assigned to a spearhead will give no thought to the front line they leave behind, and this can be very easy to cut off and encircle them. You should really only use this in combination with other armies that are keeping your front line secure, or when you know you can capitulate a target if you just rush one more victory point. Now, in terms of defensive orders, fallback lines allow you to order tactical retreats, fighting as you fall back to a better position, so you can use that in your own territory and say, hey, we're going to fall back to here, and use our defensive line there. And area defense orders allow you to order a garrison. This will automatically replace any offensive orders you have, and you can select regions and say, I really want to just hold these areas. Armies of this order will move around to counter enemy advances, but not as aggressively as if they were on a front line. This is a great option to defend your coastline against naval invasions. Now, there are some options for editing which divisions are assigned, or changing the length or position of an order. In practice, most players will simply delete their orders and then give new ones. Now, in terms of naval invasions and paratrooper orders, naval invasions allow your troops to attack an enemy by sea. When you select this option, you have to pick a port to start from, and then pick enemy territory to invade, and it will start by drawing a line between those 2 points. Now again, you'll see in this case, you can see how many divisions are allocated and how many transports are available. And before your invasion can begin, you have to have enough intelligence on every sea region in between that you can actually execute this without having your troops be sunk at sea. It's also important to note that unless you secure a port quickly upon arrival, that your troops are likely to run out of supplies and be destroyed. It's also important to note that marine units have bonuses to naval invasions. Now, the floating harbor option works just like a regular naval invasion, but has the benefit of bringing its own makeshift harbor, allowing many more troops to land and hold out until help arrives. This, of course, requires the appropriate technology to be researched before you can use it. Paratrooper orders work similar to naval invasions, but work from an air base to the target province, and you have to have air superiority instead of naval superiority. It's also only possible to give this order to a division containing only paratrooper line units. Army Command tends to frown on ordering infantry without parachutes to jump out of a plane, no matter how badly you need to capture that point. No matter which orders you assign to a group other than exercise, you won't do anything until you tell them to execute those orders by clicking the arrow above the leader's portrait. However, you gain significant bonuses by waiting to do so until your army or army group has completed its planning. If you mouse over this arrow, you'll see division is still preparing, along with the penalty to the order's effectiveness until the general or field marshal has completed their plan. You can speed this up or offset this by using some of the options above the battle plan menu. Even if you tell the army group to execute their orders, they may still have to wait for conditions to be met, especially for things like naval invasions that take time to prepare regardless of how recklessly you might want to execute them. Your Air Force is critical to your visibility into enemy territory, supporting your ground troops, defending against enemy aircraft, and even attacking ships at sea. Now, you may start the game with some air wings ready for orders, or you may have to start building planes and training pilots first, depending on your country. Assuming that you have aircraft in reserve and want to deploy them, click any air base in your territory, and then click the Add New Air Wing button. From here, you can select which type of aircraft you want to deploy, and each air wing consists of a maximum of 100 aircraft. And with at least one air wing selected, you can right-click a region to tell them where to go. At the top left of the screen, you'll see a number of different orders. The orders available depend on what type of air wing is selected, and we'll go through each of those options here. Pilot exercises work just like Army exercises, generating experience at the cost of equipment and manpower. Air superiority orders your fighters to engage enemy fighters and bombers. Close air support orders your CAS aircraft to assist divisions in ground combat by bombing their targets. Interception tries to stop enemy bombers in close air support. And strategic bombing orders your bombers to attack enemy buildings, infrastructure, and industry. The small crosshair next to strategic bombing allows you to specify target priorities for this order. Naval Strike orders your naval bombers to attack enemy ships. Kamikaze Strike works like Naval Strike, but at the cost of significant equipment and pilot losses, and usually requires a special national spirit to order. Port Strike orders your bombers to attack enemy ships in port. Logistics Strike orders your bombers to attack trains, trucks, and other supply components. Air Supply orders your aircraft to provide supplies to your own divisions without relying on land or sea transports. Naval Mine Laying lets you mine a sea region via aircraft, and Naval Mine Sweeping lets you clear that region. Air Recon allows you to see enemy divisions and provide a bonus to intelligence. And Naval Patrol will order your aircraft to help spot ships in a region without engaging them in combat. You can assign air missions over enemy territory even when you're not at war. In this case, those missions will begin as soon as the war breaks out. Instead of assigning orders to a particular region, you can also assign air wings to individual armies. The orders work the same way, but they will automatically try to execute those orders in the region that the army is assigned. They'll even move to the nearest air base to keep up with their armies automatically. To do this, with any air wing selected, click the small plane plus icon above the army. For navies, you can group your ships into fleets and task forces that are roughly analogous to army groups and armies, but work in sort of a reverse order. You can select a group of ships that you would like, just like you would army divisions, but from the strategic navy mode, and right-click the plus to create a new fleet. You can assign an admiral to this fleet, and apply his bonuses to all ships under his command. With the fleet selected, you can create small groups called task forces, either manually, or by clicking the Distribute Selected Ships and Balance Task Forces button to have your admiral do so automatically. You can select one type of order for your fleet from the Orders missions, and tell them exactly where to execute that order. Each task force can operate only in one region at a time, so if you select more regions than you have task forces for that admiral, they'll move between them as best they can. Often it's better to do the opposite and assign fewer regions than you have task forces. That way, when one task force has to retreat and repair, your other task forces are still covering that region. That, of course, assumes you have enough Navy to do so. The various naval missions include naval exercises that work just like Army and pilot versions, patrol orders which attempt to spot enemies before engaging, strike force orders which wait at the closest naval base until enemies are spotted, convoy raiding that orders your ships to attack enemy convoys, denying their supplies or preventing them from transporting troops, convoy escorts, which orders your ships to protect your own convoys against enemy raids, mine laying, which slows down enemy fleets and creates significant penalties against naval invasion, mine sweeping, which attempts to clear mines from a sea region, and naval invasion support, which orders your ships to bombard enemy targets of a naval invasion from sea. And the hold button will allow you to pause your orders without deleting them. Delete button will allow you to remove regions from your orders. And that's going to wrap up this section of our video. In our last and final part of the series, we're going to talk about declaring war, holding peace conferences, and some of our advanced topics like intelligence agencies, nuclear weapons, and rocketry.